Today we're at question 14 of the Shorter Catechism. Yesterday we were thinking about how our first parents, Adam and Eve, fell from the perfect state they were made in paradise in a relationship with God. They fell through sin. And the reason this world is messed up is because of sin. But question 14 asks the question, what is sin? Very important question, because many people have a wrong idea of what sin is. And the answer? Sin is any want of conformity unto or transgression of the law of God. In understanding what sin is, we have to understand, first of all, God's will. And sin is deviating from God's will. God is the standard by which everything is to be judged by. We don't measure our lives, we don't measure who we are and what we do by what our neighbour does. God is the one who decides what is right and what is wrong. So, sin has to be measured in the law of God, the commandments that God has given to us, and where we deviate from those. But this answer says two things about that. It's any want of conformity unto. It's failing to measure up to God's law. It's failing to do what God's law requires us to do. And so often when you talk to people about salvation, they'll say, I don't do this, I don't do that, I don't hurt my neighbour, I don't steal, and so forth and so forth. They'll say about what they don't do. But our big problem is that we fail to do many of the things that God calls us to do. The Bible calls us to love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the seriousness of sin is that we've failed to do that. We've failed to give ourselves fully to love God and obeying God in our lives day by day. The Bible says we're to love our neighbours as ourselves. And sin, one of the other big problems in is that we fail to do that. We fail to love our neighbours as ourselves. And so there's sins of what we have failed to do, of what the good things that should be in our lives that we don't do in the way that we ought to. So sin is any want of conformity unto it's the law of God. It's failing to do those good things that God's law calls us to do. Loving God, loving our neighbours as we should. But secondly, sin is transgression of the law of God. Or think of the word trespass. We understand what trespass means. You don't see maybe so much now, but sometimes you'd see signs trespassers will be prosecuted. And to trespass is to pick your step over that line into somebody else's territory and to go somewhere you shouldn't go. And so transgressions are like that. Transgressions are going beyond what God's law for us. So we saw the first part of sin is not doing the good things that we should be doing. The second part is going beyond God's law to do the bad things that we're told we're not to do. It's trespass. It's going into an area which God forbids. It's doing our own thing. It's following the guidance of this world. It's following the evil one. So, here we see what sin is. Sin is any want of conformity unto. It's failing to do those good things God calls us to do. And it's doing those wrong things that God forbids us to do. And the thing is, we have all sinned. None of us like to be called sinners, and yet that's what we all are by nature. That's what we all are by what we do day by day. We think of how in Jesus' days, the religious leaders pointed the finger at him for eating with tax collectors and sinners. They saw sinners as these people who were particularly evil in a different category. They didn't see themselves as sinners. But look at this definition. We're all sinners. We've all failed to love God as we should, love our neighbour as we should. We've all gone beyond what God says we should be doing in other areas of our lives, the things that are wrong. Any want of conformity unto or transgression of the law of God.